Alrighty. So I just want to say welcome everyone to our weekly press briefing, and I have a great packed house today to talk about freedom of the press. And joining me via Zoom, which is a wonderful bit of technology that we have just embraced fully during COVID, is Rebecca Landsberry, who is the executive director of NAJA, and Bryan Pollard, who is an associate director at NAJA. Rita Courtwright, managing editor of Muscogee Media. Jason Salsman, as always, in the house, representing the executive branch as the Muscogee Creek Nation press secretary. So we have lots to talk about. Big bill coming up for Muscogee Media. We're going to be looking and watching as the council considers a freedom of press or independent media bill as it's prescribed. And I just wanted to pick everyone's brain first off about we're going to try to dive into what the topic means to Indian country and maybe just a little bit of an oversight of what has gone into the drafting of this bill and why it's important, why it is the way that it's set up. And then, of course, we'll kind of pick Jason's brain on the executive branch's feelings about free press. And then Rita Courtwright here to kind of talk about the future of media at the Muscogee Creek Nation and what kind of work we have in store for us here. So just kind of welcome everyone. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Becca, Rita, Jason, for tuning in. And I kind of want to start off a little bit with setting up free press as what it means to Indian country. And Bryan, I think you're a great person to talk on that, especially with your involvement in the Red Press Initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about that project and what it meant to dissect what people actually think about how the press is being represented in Indian country?
So we started the Red Press Initiative at the Native American Journalists Association a few years ago because we understood anecdotally that press freedom was really inconsistent in Indian country. Some communities have a very strong press. Others, they may not have those freedoms. And we knew that we had all heard the stories about it, but there wasn't really any data. The problem had not been quantified. And so we started the Red Press Initiative to really start gathering data so that we could develop a more quantifiable understanding of the problem. And that way, hopefully develop a more generalizable solution that can be applied to a wide variety of communities across Indian country, kind of no matter where they are on the spectrum of press freedom, right? And so with that as the background, we've now conducted a survey. We conducted the survey across, we pushed it out across all of Indian country. We had about 500 respondents. And so we're still in the process of kind of crunching that data and seeing what it looks like. But hopefully we're going to have something that we can present soon, and it will also be appearing on our NAJA website once we have it.
Is there any early indications that you're seeing that something, any trends that you can kind of tackle right now and identify?
I would say that the data does support a lot of the stories that we've heard, in the sense that there are definitely tribal media producers, meaning people who work for tribal media, that are reporting that they experience censorship, that they experience the requirement to receive prior approval before they can publish, that are experiencing harassment from tribal officials as they try to report on tribal affairs. And so those things are definitely apparent in the data, and we look forward to rolling that out.
Okay, wonderful. Not so much that wonderful that we have that kind of thing going on, but wonderful that we're able to kind of quantify it in the numbers and actually show what's going on. Hey, Becca, can you just kind of clue us in a little bit about like NAJA's overall role in, Native American media and what you guys stay busy with and how you've been such an asset to the Muscogee Creek Nation in this journey of free press? I mean, we've had it, it's rolled back, we're seeing legislation come up again. What's been your role as the Native American Journalists Organization in helping facilitate that kind of a conversation, a support?
Sorry, Angel, if that one was directed at me, I'm sorry if I missed the first part of it. My my headphones cut out, so I apologize.
No, we're just kind of like wanting to build for the audience, like what NAJA's role in supporting free press in Indian country is, and how you guys have specifically helped with the Muscogee Creek Nation's draft of legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bryan talked a little bit about the Red Press Initiative, which is, a project of NAJA. And, one of the big things that we as an organization that's, been around for more than 35 years now, since the 70s, we were really founded on this idea of, empowering tribal media. And I'll go back to some earlier research that we did with the Native Health News Alliance, and that was around 2014. And one of the questions that we had in a survey that we did for that, which was a grant project, was asking people where their most trusted forms of news were in Indian country. And the majority of respondents to that survey said, that they trust their tribal media the most to report on things that are happening within that tribe. So more than mainstream media, they trust tribal media to get stories right and to make sure that that coverage is accurate in covering that particular community. So NAJA as an organization was born out of the need for accurate representation of tribal communities in media, and wanting to empower those tribal journalists to be able to do their job and to make sure that they were able to report without interference from the government in any branch or any capacity. So that's really where we're coming from when we have built these projects, built our resources, that we have a series of reporting guides that help mainstream media and tribal media report on Indian country accurately and ethically. So I think that's kind of where we're coming from in our resource base when we house things like, I think we have all of the I guess they're more like templates. They're copies of the legislation that we host on the NAJA website that tribes can come in and access at any time, and base potential free press legislation on, which is kind of what we did to help Muscogee media along the process back in 2015 and leading up to where we're at today in 2020. So those are a really great resource for any tribal media outlet who's looking to introduce free press protections at the legislative level. They can go on and take the parts that they need to, which I think speaks to, the strengths of this legislation specifically. It has elements from a lot of different, a lot of the different templates that really make it a strong bill and support free press. So I'm really excited to dig into it, and hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what NAJA does as one of our kind of the tenets of the organization.
Before we dive into all the components of this particular legislation, I wanted to kind of like point out the just juxtaposition of this situation that tribal media often finds itself in. On the one hand, we have our audience saying that they trust more than anyone else the journalists in Native American, organizations to report on Native American issues. And then yet you have the data backing up the fact that many of these reporting entities are experiencing some form of censorship. Can you kind of speak to the atmosphere that kind of, fosters that to happen? Because I feel like from my point of view, I often see myself covering stories that, and Jason can probably attest to this even too, that maybe Channel 6, Channel 8, Fox 23, they just don't really, it doesn't get their, attention as much as it would get mine. So can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I do think that there is, a great responsibility placed on tribal media, because it is your own community. And so you have that responsibility to, report accurately and fairly on your own community. And then there's also, there's a challenge from, the citizens, who is ultimately who we have to be responsible to as citizens and reporters that are, working in tribal media outlets. So I realize there can be a rub sometimes between, if you're a tribal media experiencing pushback from, your tribal government, and report this, don't report this, but you're ultimately being responsible to those citizens for making sure your information is accurate and it's ethical and it's complete and with context. So that's where, sometimes that conflict can come into play, and it puts, tribal media reporters like yourself kind of in the middle of this back and forth in a position you never signed up for, and you're just trying to do your job, trying to report accurately and fairly, and uphold those journalism ethics that you signed on for as a journalist. So really creates a tough position for tribal media reporters sometimes in trying to please both sides, when really what they should be focused on is making sure that the citizens have that accurate information too. So it is an unfortunate problem. And again, that's one of the reasons, NAJA was founded, is, to kind of create a network of support for those journalists who are facing that issue. It's so unique to Indian country. And, and other journalists, you have issues that you're facing in journalism and accurate representation in general, but nowhere else, in the U.S. Is facing these types of specific issues that we have in Indian country when it comes to, reporting as tribal media outlets. And each tribe has its own unique relationship with their tribal media outlet. And, there's a handful of tribes right now that have free press protections at the legislative level. None that have it at the constitutional level, which is a whole, that's a whole other level of protection. But as a starting point, I think to have the bill coming up and it be a really strong bill at the legislative level, I think it's exciting to, see that come to pass and hopefully provide some protection and a buffer between, the administration and the outlet itself for Muscogee media.
So specifically talking on the components of this bill, like what is it, and this is a question for anybody who wants to field it, what is it specifically that makes the bill strong, and what are we looking at as those components of providing some protections? I mean, nobody has to have enough protection that you could never lose your job, but as a journalist, you want to know that when you're out there just kind of doing your job, that you have like the ability to do so. Because the argument that you often see brought up, and this is specific to not probably tribes, because many times it's the tribes footing the bill, but what are the components that you set up to help with that when it is in fact the tribe putting the funding forth to bring the information to the people? Anybody? Bryan, you're probably the guy for that one.
Well, there's a couple of things that I would touch on because they're both incredibly important, and maybe the other panelists can expand on it. One is having an editorial board. You absolutely have to have a board that is somewhat independent, that can not only set fair policy that governs the editorial practices of the organization, but that also serves as something of a political buffer between the government and the organization so that they can do their jobs and have editorial freedom. And so I think having an impartial editorial board is absolutely essential. The second thing is budgetary protection. One of the things that we saw in our survey data was that about a quarter of tribal media producers reported that they think that their content is influenced by budgetary pressures. In other words, the government may open or close the purse strings based on whether they like or dislike what is being published in tribal media, and that's extremely troubling. And so there has to be some sort of firewall or protection in place so that the purse strings can't be used to influence coverage.
So one of the things I like to point out, and I've had many side conversations with government officials and things like that who are trying to learn about this process, and I almost see that editorial board as a safety net for every entity involved. If somebody is really upset at a story that I've written, and they run to the chief's office and say, I just don't like that reporter and what she wrote, and then the chief has the freedom to say, well, there is this board in place and there is this process in place, and that's the way we navigate our complaints. And then also from the journalist perspective, if an official who does control funding, like you said, has a vote in our funding, is really upset about an issue, and rather than just saying, well, I'm slashing out of that budget, that particular person's, salary, then they have a navigating process too by which they can lodge complaints, and that kind of works both ways. It can work for the person whose boots are on the ground getting the information, and then it can also work for elected officials who need to, present themselves in a transparent manner. They say, hey, we've set aside this process outlined in law, and this is how we follow it. Any thoughts on comparing that to, say, like the state level? Because I've kind of seen instances where the state of Oklahoma has public funds for public information, and to some degree. I mean, we see these organizations like OETA and things like that. They do have some stake in that. So it's not completely out of the realm of possible when you see government funding going to, citizen access to information, is it?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that, that model for tribal media, it makes a lot of sense to me as, kind of a publicly, funded entity that is, providing a public service to citizens, and for the administration to, acknowledge that service and say, we're going to make sure that you're funded because you're providing an essential service to the citizens. I think it's really progressive to me, as an idea for them to take that perspective and see the value that tribal media bring to that too. And I'll also add to what Bryan said too about the editorial board and its importance too. I think it's really great to see that we're basically, with this bill, would be adding Muscogee media representation back in. So with the current legislation that's in place, it doesn't actually have a direct representation on the editorial board. I think one is designated by the legislative branch, one by the executive branch, and then with amongst themselves, they select the third member. So this legislation would change that slightly to allow for representation by both the executive branch, the legislative branch, as well as a direct representative for Muscogee media, which I think is a really great model to adopt in this version of the bill.
Karen Medina is asking a question here. It says, she's asking, so there are no tribes as of yet that have free press protection at the constitutional level. Is that correct?
Yes, none at the constitutional level. Bryan may want to expand on that. Did you have
I'll actually say, so part of my research with the Red Press Initiative was to look at tribal constitutions. And what I found actually is that there is a lot of dissonance between what tribes enshrine in their constitutions and what we're seeing practiced out in the field, because many tribes actually do protect free press and free speech in their constitutions. When tribes started adopting constitutional frameworks in 1934, after the Indian Reorganization Act, we saw some great language that were placed in constitutions that really gave tribal citizens unfettered access to free speech and free press. And then in 1968, there was another legislation that was passed, the Indian Civil Rights Act, which basically gave language within the act itself that was very similar to the First Amendment. And it said that tribes shall make no law that prohibits free press or free speech. And so between those two types of language, back from the 30s and 40s into the 60s and 70s, we actually see those press protections across a very broad swath of tribal constitutions. The problem is that we're not seeing that being practiced. And so we need to find a way to bridge that gap between what tribes are saying they value in their constitutions versus what's being practiced.
And there is a whole other alphabet in between there shall not be anything against and there shall be. So there's always that.
Yeah.
Jason, have you gotten any feel on the climate of the executive branch? We're what are we, 48 hours out from, I don't know which version, how often we've been 48 hours out since November of 2018, but here we are again. Like, what's the feel on the executive branch side? How's our leadership thinking in the executive branch? Are they ready to do away with us?
No, very, very excited. our executive branch, our current executive branch, voted for us back in 2018 when free press was repealed. And then our current principal chief actually sponsored and brought forth a free press bill to try to save free press afterwards. So obviously, our two executive, if you're a free press guy or a free press girl, these are your guys as far as wanting to have them in there and be supportive of this. I think that the principal chief is very happy, speaking on behalf of him, talking about NAJA's involvement in this, and Rebecca and Bryan. Respect you guys so much. Worked with you guys for a long time. We've been colleagues, we've been friends, but we've also been people that discussed really the spirit of this issue that we're talking about, not only in spirit, but in practice, how we make it work at our tribes, how we make it work at other tribes. Not every shoe fits everybody equally on this issue. We have certain tribes that we've talked about that still aren't even where we are, that still have a long way to go. And they've got good journalists there. They've got people that are passionate about telling their citizens what's going on and having open dialogue. And listen, this isn't always fun. As tribal nations, we have scars, we have great stories to tell, we have sad stories to tell, we have controversial stories to tell. So if you're getting into tribal politics in 2020, just be prepared. I think you should be prepared to answer tough questions to the best of your ability, but also welcome that, because that's the only way we can grow as tribes, and we can sort of leave behind instances what we saw back in 2018, where I just think that there was a fundamental misunderstanding of what this means for Muscogee Creek Nation, because you see things like, for instance, when we were talking earlier, I was kind of making little notes about what everyone was saying, and kind of okay, we can speak on that. But I think when we talk about tribes, we're a unique communal people. It's hard to have an unbiased editorial board because we all know each other in some form or fashion, and there's a lot of people in Indian country that know each other and work together, have grown up together, things like that. It's hard to also have our own people maybe put others in the spotlight or in the news that you may know or that you may have worked with or been friends with. And we even heard on that fateful day in 2018 that just broke all of our hearts. We even heard the words uttered, I just think there's too much negativity about us in our newspaper. I think what's negative is up to the citizens to decide, not for the folks that put the things in the paper or that are reading the paper, things like that. So, for me, there are challenges, but it's so much more worth it. And I know the executive branch, like I said, so happy that we were able to get NAJA involvement and sort of some red line edits and things like that, to where we don't need to rush. We need to get the perfect press bill that's unrepealable. How about that? I think that's what we want to get. We want to get something that you can't poke holes in, that you can't say we need to go back and take a look at this. We need to get it right, everything like that. So I can speak for the executive branch to say they're very pleased to at least see us to this point of this journey back here again.
As a person who was back on staff on that day, I can honestly say that day I was completely stunned to hear the there's too much bad news, because I never saw an email or suggestion saying that you should probably balance this with something a little more lighthearted. And that is something that we try to consciously keep up with. Are we hammering too much legal news at people? Do we need some features? So it did just blindside out of nowhere. And it was like, there's this process to use, and please use it to communicate with us, because that's who we do work for the people. But one thing I haven't heard from the public at large was them feeling like a need to repeal free press. I've never heard a citizen utter that. An elected official actually just felt there was too much bad news. And my answer to that is I would trust the bad news of my community more to myself and my reporting rather than the New York Times doing it, because some people just get news in Indian country really, really wrong on a regular basis. And that's why people like me still have jobs, is to kind of come in and actually look at these scenarios and communicate with who we need to communicate with, and do that in a manner that's respectful of our community and represents our community as well as we can. Rita, we've got big work ahead. Can you just give me like a rundown of what, like, if this passes on Thursday, what are we looking at? What are we staring down here?
Man, this is a really exciting time for me. As some of you may or may not know, I came in here, and can you all hear me? Okay, I'm sorry. I came in here back in 2018, about 3 weeks before all of that happened, and I was unsure of what I was walking into. So it has definitely been a learning process. I definitely look forward to having an editorial board to help me make with these decisions. While there has been an editorial board in place, they're just not as active maybe as I would assume that an editorial board should be. So it's been really challenging for me over the last year and a half, almost 2 years, to be in this position. Now that we're here and it looks like maybe we might have a shot at this free press legislation, I'm excited what's around the corner and what we can do. You know, I hope to expand on our reporters and get some more reporters in here. Lately, we've been running the newspaper just on 3 staff members, and hopefully we can change that and get some more staff in here and expand out the area in which we cover, I guess is the best way to look at it. Get more news out and make it more timely. I definitely want to work on, I love these things that Jared does on YouTube, getting these YouTube out there so that citizens can watch it right now, or they can watch it at their own time slot. So that's a good thing. I want to get the paper and all of that information updated online as quickly as possible so that we can be the first, like Angel had mentioned to me before, the first to break a story dealing with Muscogee Creek Nation, as opposed to other news entities who've been before us and who've broke the story before us. I want to be that person who does that for the tribe. I want our information to be out there coming from Muscogee media and not from the Tulsa World or First.
Yeah, I think we often have this unique position where we can be the ones who are right there, really close, have access to the officials and the folks that it actually involves. We have the mechanisms in place where we can disseminate it out. We have a following too, like surprisingly throughout all this difficulty back and forth and where we sit now. And as like Rita's pointed out, that we technically have a board. They're not endowed with very many actual authoritative powers. Basically, they're there to, if we ever have a question and we say, hey, we just don't know how to approach this, that's what they're there for. So having a board that's actually more involved in that process and can engage in planning and where to put the money and where to, beef up or scroll back, what we're doing, that would be invaluable going forward into the era of independent news. And some of us who've been around the block a minute, we're like hyping everybody up. Okay, we're working for the citizens. If we get independent statutory agency status, like they're the boss now, and it's go time. So it's exciting. It's looking like a really positive bill. This is like the first time we've seen a bill maintain most of its structure going through edits. And I think that right now, just to kind of update everyone, it passed out of the Business, Justice, and Finance Committee. There was some recommendations from the Attorney General. He saw a few little things. Have you guys got to look at the amendments or the marks on the new bill? Is it pretty much intact and looking like the bill should going into full session? Anybody who wants to take that one?
I think the last version that I saw looked pretty good. There's still like one spot I think really that maybe needs a little clarification, but I'll also say to follow up something that was added in this version that was missing from the current version, because we're NAJA in here representing. So in the original free press bill, there was a NAJA ethical requirement that's being re-added to this version. So I have to appreciate that. And then also I want to acknowledge that so that the aim of adding in that NAJA requirement is to ensure that the department is going to conduct fair coverage, of course, in accordance with NAJA standards. And then there's also language to accommodate the confirmation with the tribe's customs and cultures, which is something that is new, to this version of the bill too, which I think, as an editorial board representation, like that's something that's really, important, and where that would come into play would basically be, your editorial board is made up of tribal citizens. I think the majority of them, like 2 out of the 3 must be Muscogee Creek citizens. And so those are going to be, the holders of your tribal knowledge. They're going to know, what's best for reporting on the tribe. And if you have an ethics question as leadership of the department in any way, that's a great way to utilize that editorial board. So come to them and say, I have this ethics question. I whatever it is you want to use them for. I think it should be a really engaged and open communications process with your board leadership. And in this instance for this bill, it's the director who will be, going back and forth with the editorial board. But I think keeping that open line of communication between that when issues arise, as soon as they arise, is a really important step to that too.
Yeah, because waiting too long, if you have the board in place and you have access to them, and time is a real critical element to many of the stories. You need to access them. You need to get their thoughts and opinions and some kind of consensus together, and you need to know how to proceed forward. And oftentimes it can be within a few days of when you've gotten a news lead or a tip. And so having access to them and having them be a person that you can, jump on the horn to and get some guidance is going to be really important. Can you kind of give us a little bit of background on how NAJA puts together reporting guides? Because I do remember reading the NAJA Code of Ethics, SBJ Code of Ethics, and that's something that plays a critical role in journalism in general. Can you kind of fill us, our audience, in on what NAJA does and how they put together reporting guides and things like that, and how they kind of, I don't ever want to be on the side of NAJA ever having to lay the smackdown on Muscogee media. So but how does that look when you do have to?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I'm sure Bryan will have some more to add to that as well. But really, we work in tandem with our board, so our board of directors is made up of 9 working journalists across Indian country, and right now that includes journalists in the U.S. as well as Canada. So we have representation, in Alaska, in Oklahoma, across Indian country here, across Turtle Island. So these are the working journalists that are out there in the field every day, and they're the ones that really make up in large part the editors of our reporting guides. So they're really attuned to what the needs are for covering these issues that we put the guides out for ICWA, the most recent one, of course, for McGirt. And I want to say too, acknowledge what an important role Muscogee media is playing this year in 2020. It's been such a huge year for the tribe, and information is such an important commodity with covering COVID, with covering the pandemic. So I will also just add that it's just really important to have that communication with the citizens when these big issues are happening. And McGirt is a perfect example of how mainstream, they like to parachute into Indigenous communities and write one story and then parachute out again. And when you do that, you miss a lot of context that's essential to, ethically and accurately reporting on Indian country. So we create, these reporting guides to help mainstream media get it right. And whether that's advising them on, Indigenous terminology, expert sourcing in Indian country. There are a whole, list of guides that we have in our repertoire that are aimed at, being resources for mainstream who may come in and be assigned a story and have never worked in Indian country in their lives. And their editors are like, okay, go and do this. And they're like, where do I start? So we do this with that aim in mind. And even for some of the larger and largest mainstream outlets in the U.S., they still get it wrong. And we create these guides, and unfortunately,
New York Times.
Exactly.
We were all thinking it.
Exactly. So, but yeah, that is an unfortunate, part of our job is like we have a rapid response team within the board that we work with us, in conjunction with the staff and respond to, an inaccurate coverage or flawed coverage of Indian country when we see it. And, we're the only organization that's doing that and looking out for Indigenous representation in media. And so it's a really important role for us at NAJA. But again, we hate it every time we have to review a rapid response request. It's just like it breaks all of our hearts, and we hate having to do that part of the job, but it's really essential. Like that work is really important. So yeah, Bryan might have some more to add to that.
The only thing that I mean, Becky you did a great job of covering it, but the one thing that I might add is that, we also don't consider ourselves to be the complete experts on the entire world of journalism, right? And so there are many guides that we've produced that we do in partnership with other organizations. The McGirt Guide actually is a great example because we did that in conjunction with the Native American Rights Fund. And we really worked with them hand in hand all the way through the editing process on that to make sure that we had it right. And we've partnered with other organizations on other guides too. And so I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is that this is not just a small group of folks within NAJA trying to push out what we consider to be our expertise to the world. We're really bringing people in from other organizations that have other types of expertise to make sure that we get it right.
And I can say that I find those guides intensely valuable to what I do every day, because I'm not a I didn't go to law school, so I'm looking for any kind of resource that's going to keep me on the straight and narrow and the path of reporting on things that are so much out of the scope of my personal education. So they are really an invaluable tool. The relationships with the organizations that you guys have, and then our relationship with NAJA, has been just a tremendous asset in training and keeping us sharp with our skills and things like that. And I will have to admit that McGirt has been the absolute example of who is adhering to ethical journalism and who is not. I found myself in a few cases jumping on a soapbox and saying, I really think that, I won't call them out by name, but I really think your organization could benefit from a membership with NAJA and some education. Just in the difference of how I wrote my headlines versus some of these other ones was such a very different lens. Some people were saying that SCOTUS sided with, the tribe, and then my headline looked more like never disestablished. So we've picked up very different things based on the communities that we've represented, and those are really important to our audiences, and that's probably a big contributor to why my audience doesn't really go to that other organization for the first-hand bit of news, and they want to see that through the lens that we represent. I want to say, has anybody got anything else to add? I think I'm coming up on a really long briefing this week, breaking that 30-minute mark. So
I will say, a lot of us did sort of cringe at all the headlines on McGirt Day. Did the Supreme Court just give back half of Oklahoma? And then, a lot of a certain, I won't name the paper, but I think for a lot of people, as you talked about, there was a McGirt Guide from NAJA, but there's still things that kind of slips in communication or really just slips in understanding of the case. And for Muscogee Creek Nation, it was never about the gentlemen's names on the cases, which we've come to synonymously refer to these cases as. The Muscogee Creek Nation, Chief Hill certainly, and Second Chief Beaver, we put all of our thoughts, hearts, prayers with the victims in these cases and remember them and hold them up, because this is ultimately a story about survival, and it's also a story about never giving up and having that day where promises are kept. And we don't want that to be synonymous with violent criminals. So for us, it's not about the names on the cases. It's certainly about the spirit of what those cases brought forth. I'm certainly glad that those cases were brought forth in whatever means that it has to happen. But what I'm getting at is you do see stories about our interest in this case as a jurisdictional and a territorial case. And then the big picture right under that is Jim C. McGirt in an orange jumpsuit. So people that don't know any better look at that story and go, oh, well, you know, this is about this guy. Let me see what's up with this guy and why the Creek Nation is you know, teaming up to push his agenda to get there. And then it's in. So you can see where the confusion comes in, and that's unfortunate because for us it was always about the promise kept, the territorial boundaries and jurisdictional issues.
Man, if anyone ever had a bad thought about us having a mugshot on the front page of our paper, that one really kind of killed my soul a little bit, to see Jim C. McGirt you know, mugshot, and then like the Muscogee Creek. No, this guy doesn't really represent us and all that. But yes, I totally get what you're saying. So we're all going to sit back and just chew our fingernails for the next 2 days, guys. And I want to thank you all for coming on and giving us the inside scoop about what's coming up, what's at stake, and where we are in Indian country reporting the news. Thank you so much, Rebecca Landsberry, Executive Director of NAJA, Rita Courtwright, Managing Editor of Muscogee Media, Bryan Pollard, Associate Director of NAJA, and as always, Jason Salsman, the Muscogee Creek Nation Press Secretary. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you on the other side. Hopefully we'll be celebrating.
Thank you all very much, and good luck. We have our fingers crossed.
See you all soon.